Ukraine has raised an alarm over increasing Russian forces near its eastern border. Violence has risen along the line of contact, which separates Ukrainian troops from Russia-backed separatists. As a result, the Russian military buildup has heightened fears of an escalation in the conflict. Russian military units have been conducting tactical exercises in Stavropol and Krasnodar regions near the Ukrainian border. But Russia has said its forces pose no threat and that troop movements were only defensive. Following a rise in tensions with Russia, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to the eastern front line. Zelensky has been appealing to Western allies for support.
Тому що є дійсно загострення ситуації на Донбасі. Дійсно, ми всі це бачимо. І бачать і бійці, і головнокомандуючі, і всі командири. Розуміють, що працюють по наших хлопцях снайпери.
Zelensky called on the NATO earlier this week to lay out a path for Ukraine to join the Western military alliance. His comments drew an immediate rebuke from Moscow, which said Kiev's approach to NATO could further inflame the situation. In a perceived warning, senior Kremlin official Dmitry Kozak has said that the start of the major military action in eastern Ukraine would mark the beginning of the end of Ukraine. Over a phone call, German Chancellor Angela Merkel asked the Russian president to pull back the Kremlin's military build-up near the border with Ukraine, while Putin in turn accused Kiev of provocative actions in the conflict region. Calling it Russian aggression, the United States has also expressed concern over the conflict. The White House press secretary has stated that Russia now has more troops on the border with Ukraine than at any time since 2014. Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, and in the aftermath, protests by Russia-backed anti-government separatist groups took place in the Donetsk and Luhansk division of Ukraine, which are collectively called the Donbas region. These demonstrations escalated into an armed conflict between the separatist forces of the self-declared Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics and the Ukrainian government. Initial protests reflected discontent with the new Ukrainian government, but Russia took advantage of them to launch a coordinated political and military campaign against Ukraine. Russian citizens led the separatist movement in Donetsk from April until August 2014. Since then, Kiev and the West have been accusing Russia of supporting the separatists with weapons and troops. But Moscow has repeatedly denied those claims. The conflict has claimed more than 13,000 lives since the year 2014. For more on these developments, our correspondent Julia Chapman joining us live from Moscow. Hi, Julia. The Russian troops deployment has triggered fears of an escalation in tensions. What is Russia's stance at this point?
Well, Russian officials say that this is nothing to be alarmed about. They have every right to move their troops on their own territory as they see fit, and they maintain that all of their movements are indeed defensive. They've been warning of a Ukrainian escalation, provocations in rhetoric from the Ukrainian government in the last couple of weeks, and they say that is why troops have been moved to areas around the Ukrainian border. Of course, Ukraine and the US have accused Russia of troop buildups on the Ukrainian border as well as in Russian annexed Crimea, which it annexed in 2014 from Ukraine. And so there have been serious concerns from those two countries of what Russia is up to. But Russian officials say that this is simply a defensive tactic. They are strategically preparing to defend themselves if there is a further escalation of the situation in the Donbass. And of course, there have in the last couple of weeks been an increased incidents of violence. There have been 5 Ukrainian servicemen killed in the region in the last week alone, 25 since the beginning of this year, and that's compared to around 50 in all of 2020. So certainly tensions are rising in eastern Ukraine, but Russia maintains that it is not doing anything offensive. It is simply taking steps to protect its own territory.
Right. While it maintains that the troop deployment is defensive and should not raise any alarm, there is a warning coming in from the senior Kremlin official, Dmitry Kozak, who says that the start of major military action in eastern Ukraine would mark the beginning of the end of Ukraine.
That's right, some very alarming rhetoric from the Kremlin, from the deputy chief advisor to President Vladimir Putin. And a lot is being read into those comments as a warning, essentially, to Ukraine not to do anything dramatic, not to take any major risks when it comes to this conflict, because Russian officials say that they would step in to prevent any kind of humanitarian disaster on the scale of Srebrenica in Yugoslavia. And that is something that Russia is very keen to avoid happening here. And of course, Russia has in the last couple of years offered a pathway to Russian citizenship for many people who live in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions of eastern Ukraine, and Russian officials saying that they would protect Russian citizens in the region if it came to that. So certainly very alarming rhetoric from many Russian officials here that is being interpreted in both Kiev and Washington as posturing from Russia, and certainly causing great concern in those two governments. The US says that it will stand by Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine is calling for renewed efforts to start the accession process to NATO, saying that that is the only way to end the war in eastern Ukraine. From the Russian perspective, that is also very worrying. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova saying that joining NATO would be a sure way to escalate the conflict in eastern Ukraine.
Julia Chapman, thanks very much for those updates. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.